Well, we're on our way down to Steve's again.
Yes.
Because he's been tearing the railroad apart some more still. Again. Oh my heck. This has, of course, been such a fabulous railroad, and we've had so much fun playing with it and watching him build it over the decades that he's been building it and so on. But if you've been following along on the show, he started tearing it apart a while back, and first because he wanted to move out of state. Now he's changed his mind on that because he's feeling better. He got a new hip. And now he's got the idea to build a new railroad in the same spot. So one way or the other, he's still planning to tear his huge, massive, amazing railroad apart. And he's got some people coming over this afternoon who are buying some of the buildings, and it's going to be sort of like a yard sale, only it's going to be a layout sale. So
yeah, layout sale.
We wanted to check in on that and see what he's pulling apart and what's the what, and show you guys just the current state of affairs on the dismantling of Steve's railroad. Check this out. So for, almost 40 years, we've been screwing around over on Steve's railroad as he builds it. Over the years, it became the Sunday tradition for a whole bunch of us to go over there and play with the railroad, including Al. And anyway, after Al got divorced, he just sort of moved in with Steve, and he's been hanging out here ever since. Anyway, after Al passed away and Steve's health wasn't doing too well, he got the crazy idea to tear all this apart. What we have found is this is just sort of the weird nature of life. Life goes on, and you've built something that you can't quite deal with, and you can't quite manage anymore. This has caused you and I to reevaluate what we wanted to do at Garage Mahal.
Yeah, we started out with a plan, and now we've decided to revise that plan.
Well, you start to realize that you don't have the ability to climb up on top of things and crawl down under things. And even now, Steve has decided to tear this down and rebuild it in a way that's much more accessible.
Right, the mind is willing, but the body is not.
Is not. This is the wonderful little village of Porter in the Giant Canyon. You got to this area by going through a tunnel.
Right.
And to get to a lot of this area, you had to crawl down under the benchwork and come up through a lake bottom by opening the bottom of the lake and so on. It's been nice, but none of us can crawl down under there anymore. And so this area, Steve decided that all of this has to go.
Right.
This has always been perhaps the most spectacular part on the whole railroad, but Porter sits at the south end of a long canyon that's literally inaccessible except by the trains. And it's really neat back in here, but working on this section is virtually impossible. There's all these wonderful bridges at all these different levels and so on, but you can't really get to any of this if you've got a derailment. As I say, you have to crawl down underneath the layout, take the bottom out of a lake, crawl up through the bottom of the lake, and then you can access the track. And well, that's just the sort of thing Steve needs to get rid of now. He can't crawl anymore. So this is what Porter looks like now.
It's a hole.
It's a hole, and at least you can access the entire canyon area. At this point, you just walk right back in there. There is no canyon area anymore. It's just kind of a corridor down through the middle of the layout.
Yes.
So as all of this has been coming apart, Steve's been selling off the buildings and the bridges and anything that can be salvaged, and he had a bunch of people come over this particular weekend to just kind of get dibs on things and buy stuff that he'd already removed. It was kind of like a yard sale. Now here's another part of the layout that he's taken apart. This is Santaquin and the Rio Machinery Company. This beautiful scratch-built structure here. Oh man, yeah, I mean everything here is scratch-built. All of the trains, structures, trees, everything.
This doesn't look like a railroad, a model railroad. It looks real.
It does look real. And, it looks like this.
Oh my.
It's gone. The building has been removed, and Steve's trying to figure out what he wants to do with it. It's down here on the table. He's thinking of maybe turning it into a diorama, maybe just selling it. Just not at all sure what he wants to do with it. He doesn't really want to use it on the new railroad. It's a really, really peculiar building because it's hollow inside. The High Line used to go right through the middle of the building, and trains would be back here on this track going right through the building. If you look closely through the windows, you'd see trains driving through there. So here's the giant canyon area from the south end. This used to be mills and lakes and ponds and pine trees, and now it's just kind of a corridor through here. Pretty soon this whole mountain will be removed. This was part of the impetus behind redesigning the whole railroad, was to get rid of this whole really, really inaccessible section.
His first original plan was to move out of state.
Well, he was doing so badly with his hip that he decided he'd move down to be with his kids in Arizona. But now that he's got a new hip, he's decided to go ahead and finish dismantling the railroad, yes, but then rebuild the railroad.
Right.
So some of this stuff is being turned into dioramas, some of it's being sold, and some of it's going to be repurposed onto the new railroad. But surprisingly very little. Steve really wants to start all over. Now this is the power plant from Porter. That was one of the really neat things on the railroad. This is what it looked like when it was set up and actually working. Isn't that something?
That is just awesome. It looks real.
It does look real. And these are the outlets for the water. The water's currently shut off. Steve didn't really want to try modeling the rushing water coming out of the power plant. The power plant is just such an amazing structure, and right now I don't think he has a plan for it. He's not quite sure what he's going to do with it. The structure, surprisingly, is actually made out of balsa wood.
That's just amazing.
And then he burns the stone lines into it with a wood burning tool. Now these are the flumes that used to bring water from the ponds down the giant canyon to the power plant. Those are just kind of on the loose as well. Again, not sure what he's going to do with any of this, but he's got the whole power plant and the flumes and the dam that used to feed the flumes. All of that's just kind of on the loose now. And this is the coal mine at Porter.
I like that.
Isn't that something? Actually, Al started building this on a different railroad years ago. This is the MRS Railroad, and we were all working on this together at the MRS Hobby Shop. But we had to, unfortunately, tear this whole railroad down in 2008 when the hobby shop closed. We were a bit younger back then. The railroad was principally the brainchild of Al. He'd made a deal with the MRS hobby shop and said, let's build a railroad up there. And then he did a lot of arm twisting and whatnot to get the rest of us to go along with his harebrained scheme. So this was really kind of Al's railroad. But we were all able to do things like crawl up on top of the railroad and crawl down under the railroad. And these are all things that we're just no longer able to do anymore.
The old knees won't let us.
So here again, we tried to dismantle the railroad very, very carefully, put most of these buildings into storage, but whatever we could, we moved over to Steve's railroad. But it has left us with a surplus of bridges and structures and trestles and just all kinds of things that we have to this day, and we're not quite sure what to do with. I always sort of considered them to be Al's, since it was his railroad, really. So anyway, Steve took Al's coal mine and just repurposed it for his own railroad, kept very little of Al's original coal mine, and turned it into something decidedly more Steve.
Yes.
So this whole area of Porter was very photogenic. As I say, it was probably the most spectacular part of the whole railroad. But the detail in this little coal mine area was just so fun. And look what he's done with it.
He has turned that into a diorama. Ah.
Yeah, he sold it to someone, or ostensibly sold it to someone, and that person wanted it reworked into a diorama, which is what's been happening to a lot of the railroad. But then the person sort of changed their mind, and I don't know what's gone on. So Steve has actually finished the diorama up. Here it is all finished, and no buyer for it.
Oh boy.
So I'm sort of debating buying it, but I don't know what we would do with it either. He may put it up on eBay.
I'll bet it finds a buyer.
Well, it will if he puts it up. He doesn't like doing that sort of thing. He's, it's like, oh, can't somebody just come by and buy it from me? And it's like, well, you can put it on eBay. Well, I don't want to do eBay. So we might put it up for him. I don't know what we're going to do. Like I say, might buy it ourselves and stick it in the collector's attic like we need another thing in the collector's attic. And here we have downtown Porter.
Oh my.
With its beautiful train station. It should look sort of familiar to you because it's incredibly like the Grizzly Flats Depot.
It is.
It's different, of course, but I just can't believe how much the Porter Depot is like the Grizzly Flats that you modeled.
Exactly, including the two-holer.
Exactly.
And right down to the Sears and Roebuck catalog.
And the corn cob. Joking aside, this little community of Porter was so neat that it too has become a diorama. It's got a little ways to go before this one's finished, and here again, Steve doesn't have a really clear idea of what he's going to do with it, but he may have a buyer for it already lined up. That's one thing about this diorama concept of his. These dioramas may live on for quite some time. And here's yet another diorama he's working on. These are a couple of houses that Al built, and he's turning these into a little diorama for Al's ex-wife.
And of course it has to include Al's pine trees, or it just would not be Al.
He built hundreds of these for Steve's railroad, and so there is a surplus of them. And a surplus of a lot of odd things. So there we are, just one last look at the town of Porter, which is no more.
But it will live on.
As dioramas, indeed, and it may live on for quite some time.
This is such a beautiful layout that Steve has built.
And it's a shame that it's going away, that he's taking it apart.
But it isn't going away. It will be preserved and passed on from generation to generation.
Yeah, these dioramas may become something of heirlooms, who can say? Well, that's pretty neat.
Oh, no kidding.
Those guys were getting some pretty good deals, I gotta tell you. He was
kidding.
letting stuff go for way less than I would let it go.
No kidding.
But he's just got so much stuff, and he's taking the layout apart so quickly, and so there it is. He's just dismantling and selling some things. So follow along with that. I don't know. We've talked then about putting some of this on eBay. And he's talking about maybe doing that, and we'll just see how that goes. Follow the channel, stay tuned, and follow what we're doing, because if anything like that goes on, we'll post it on the community tab so you'll know that he's listed some stuff on eBay. And if you haven't been over to the channel, pop on over to the channel, and if you're not a subscriber, subscribe.
Absolutely.
Because that's good for you, because it makes you cool, and it's good for us because then we can prove to people that people are actually watching.
Yeah.
And the easy way to subscribe, we all know what it is. You ready? Zoink! Blue button says subscribe. Means what it says. Well, we're not sure how you found this movie on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday with the Tuesday Show. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.